But like everything, if you don't know the ins and outs of it, like farming, the different types of farming, there's a lot of positives and negatives. So we've got to make sure that here today we're trying to explain some of those positive and negatives, both financial and non-financial, and how it may work through. Especially on the financial side, the tax and insurance issues that Ross will go into. And when we talk tax, not only federal but state and local taxes play a big part too in this. Go through, and like I said, we'll go through the positive and negatives of the financial and non-financial. Out of interest, Wellington is one of the 5 biggest solar farms in Australia at the moment. Previously, solar farms have been the big projects going through Australia. Wind turbines are starting to catch up now on that. The break-even point on wind turbines is a shorter time period, so they're becoming more attractive. However, there is limitations on actually getting them out of the ports in Newcastle and up to the central west area, or New England is one of the renewable energy zones. There's a whole heap in the ports, but there's only so many trucks they can take out at night. It's causing, there's a bridge at Denman that's causing the issues too there. So, as I said, there's 5 renewable energy zones in New South Wales: the New England, Central West Orana, which is here, the Riverina, or they call Southwest, Illawarra, and Hunter Central Coast. Most of them are land-based, however there is a little bit of wind turbines coming offshore at Illawarra, and there's talk about on the Central Coast or Hunter region also. So, non-financial benefits. Well, the big one they promote is the ESG, Green Effect Environment, and that's very topical, the ESG, for accounting purposes at the moment. There's also the benefits for the local communities of extra money coming in, and accommodation, employment going through, improved fencing and vermin control. Most of the solar farms and the wind turbines have man-proof fencing around it, so it does stop a lot of the vermin there. If they've been designed right, sheep and chickens are the main ones that have been used under the solar panels. And cattle, as we all know, just rub up against everything and cause problems. So, but if they're designed right, the sheep and the chickens can be gone. And there was a quote from a local Dubbo farmer on the ABC. Yeah, Tom Warren, he was quoted saying we had strips of green grass during the drought, and went on to say that they've seen a 15% rise in wool production due to the solar farm, due to the shelter and the water that's come off. So when we say water, you've got condensation on the solar panels that come off, as well as they need to be cleaned any time from once a month to once every quarter, which sees a lot of water runoff as part of that cleaning process. So that brings in more the high moisture content going through. Also can bring in annuity or income for the farmers who may be put in to maintain or look after the fencing and the cleaning of these, and keeping the weeds and that out of the way. So there could be a further income production from there for the farmers. These things catch on fire. So that means your insurance goes up, but not only for you, but for your neighbours. If you've got anyone's neighbours next door, your insurance premiums go up.
So Andrew, do you know like by how much? Like is it 20%?
It depends on where they're based, how many wind turbines are in your area, and going through.
What's the likelihood that one of those are going to burn in that time?
I can't get into it. It depends on a lot of things.
So
where they're made.
Slow though, isn't it?
The big thing is whether they get turned off before a big windstorm comes through. That's when they may catch on fire. They're going too fast and cause it, and it burns out the motor basically. So that's the big thing, being able to stop them before it gets too fast to go through. So it does cause issues. Also, eyesore, not only for these, but transmission lines. Yeah, that's under the government, they'll compulsory acquire or put an easement through, and you'll have the transmission lines and storage of battery facilities, and even substations will go into some of these things. The big thing I'm concerned about is the bond make good. What happens in 20, 30 years time when they're at the end of their life, especially solar. So solar may not be too bad because they might just retrofit them and put in the latest technology because all the infrastructure is already in place. But saying that, there's solar panels have been banned from landfill in Victoria, all of the USA and most of Europe, because the heavy metals in them leak out over a period of time if they're cracked and that. So disposing of the solar panels will be an issue down the track. And then most people say, that's okay, I'm dealing with Origin Energy or Energy Australia, they won't do the wrong thing by me. Well, you're dealing with a special purpose vehicle which Origin Energy probably owns 20% of, dealt with a few other people, so who knows whether that special purpose vehicle will have any money at the end of the day. So for the lawyers in the room and the farmers is to what happens at the end of the lease, who's going to rectify, and is there any money there to do it? Is there a rental bond or anything like that to affect it? Also, resale value of the land could be positive or negative depending on your income streams coming through. Some people might be willing to have that extra rental income coming through. It could increase it, it may not, it may decrease it, just subject to what they want on the farm, which flows on to additional legal work. For the lawyer in the room, there's going to be, on a sale of a property, you'll need the leases reviewed, go through. Normally it'll be the ones that we've seen that the power companies have you must approach them to about the assignment of the lease, and they've got a last right of refusal, say yay or nay on some of them, so be careful on that. There's also increased security risk, both physical and biosecurity, so you'll have contractors coming out, reviewing, fixing, cleaning these things. But if there's a physical risk there, people coming onto your farm, but also biosecurity. You have a avian flu outbreak or foot and mouth disease, you've got to be very careful, and contractors coming in and make sure the right protocols, because under the leases, they normally have an unfettered right to come out and to your property to come into those areas. Also, when you are setting up in Glen Innes, we were talking to one of the guys a couple of weeks ago. They were building a solar farm across the thing, went straight across their main access road to the house. So they had to renegotiate another $100,000 on to put a new driveway into their property. So these are the little things that you need to look at. And for the accountants in the room, increased compliance costs with the extra income coming in, and whether it's farming or whether it's third-party income, accounting for that, GST, and going through. So that's just on the simple side of things. I'll now hand over to Ross, who will then tell you a bit more complicated things about things to watch out for, like biodiversity credits, land tax, and GST, and capital gains tax.
Right, now, I think I better start with one warning. Nothing ever happens fast with these things because there's so many hurdles you've got to go through to get it happening. You've usually got, for the larger solar farms and for the wind farms, you have multiple landowners. These usually will extend over more than one property. Wind farms, because they'll want to go along an entire ridge line, and if that's not on just one property, you'll have more farms involved. You've got all the people that are going to be affected by the transmission lines. There's more people that you've got to get on board. And then you've got to say, well, all these other complications that have got more people involved. You've got the ecological impact. Protected species are a major impact. You might not think you've got anything special on your property, but once the greenies get in and have a look, you might find there's a few sneaky problems that have come up. Trees, you might have to knock a few trees down to put a solar farm in. Usually not many, but guess what? Some tree species are considered endangered in certain areas, and they will usually have to be replaced. And my experience with one of my clients is they had to replace every felled tree with a planting of 3 new trees in a dedicated protection area. And that gets to the biodiversity offset, because they're going to say, well, this has got a biodiversity impact. The power company is going to have to compensate for any biodiversity losses by putting that solar farm in, and that is where a lot of the problems seem to come up. Now, I'm going to touch on some horrible things called tax and legal. What happens is you will have to, when it happens, you will usually have a lease of an area of your land. Before that, though, there's usually an option. This is because of the delays. The power company or some developer will want to sign you up for a lease, and you'll receive a lump sum for the lease. Or, in some instances, you are going to be paid for that option over perhaps 5 years. They'll say, look, we'll give you $100,000 as an option. We'll pay out $100,000 will pay, $100,000 will pay $20,000 per year. Actually, probably a zero on that, $1 million, and you get $100,000 a year. The problem is that the entire 5 years of payment are going to be taxed up front, because when you grant that option, that is a capital gain with no cost base other than the legals you've incurred, and you bring into account the dollar value of all the payments that you received on that for that option. If you're getting paid over 5 years and you're getting 20% per year, year one you've got a capital gain. There's no discounts on that, so you're going to get potentially up to 47% tax on that option fee. You've only got 20% cash, so that's not really a very good bargain. You also get renewals of options when it drags out. The big one I'm involved with is now 4 years, and we still haven't got the final applications lodged, because we've been still going through all the negotiations. Each of those renewals is a separate capital gain. Then, after it does get all done, they exercise the option, and what happens? You've got another capital gain with no cost base and no discounts, but you pick up the amounts that you received on the options as part of the capital gain on the lease, and you've got to reverse the capital gains you reported in the previous years. So a lot of work involved for us accountants. That's great, but there's some nasty tax surprises somewhere. As I mentioned before, no discounts. It's no general discount, because it's an asset that is disposed of at the time it's created, and so you've got no 12-month ownership, so no general discount, no small business concessions, because this has got nothing to do with your primary production business. This is to do with a commercial operation. Now, the easements for the power lines, they're exactly the same sort of set of problems. That what happens there is you usually get an easement taken over your property. Probably don't get many lump sum payments. You'll usually get annual payments, and others be ordinary income. Whatever money you are paid for your option over your property, that's the capital gain, basically. But here's the problem. You sign on that option, and basically that's the deal you are stuck with. And there are a lot of traps in here. If it does come to pass that you're locked in and you enter into one of these agreements, what within that option is going to tie you down. It might look extraordinarily attractive at first glance. You get the booby prize of maybe being paid over 5 years, and therefore you've got an upfront tax liability and haven't got the cash. But if you sign that option, you're basically locked into the terms of the lease as well. And there are tax consequences all the way down the road that can lock you in for 30 or 60 years that are locked into that option agreement. And that option will not be on terms that are going to favour you. They're going to be on terms that favour the developer or the power company. And these people have got the big end of town lawyers looking after their client. They're not looking after you. So you'll get an option that might look superficially attractive, and then later on you find there's all these booby traps in the deal that you have locked yourself into. So you don't sign one until you actually know what's in it.
Question.
Yeah.
You mentioned CGT event when they sign the option. Then you mentioned when the lease is signed, the CGT event is reversed.
Yes, you amend. There's an unlimited time period to amend the earlier tax return to reverse that capital gain.
The option capital gain.
The option on the capital gain. The capital gain and the option, yes.
Yeah, because there's a new capital gain on the lease.
That's just extra complication. The government wants to catch the tax at the earliest possible point, and they catch it when you get that first payment for the option, because at that stage you don't know, nobody knows if you're going to actually have the deal go through, so they tax the option at the point that it's created. But because that option fee then becomes part of the premium on the lease, it gets reversed at that point in time. Now, a warning, when you get on one of these arrangements, it's ordinary income, it's not. So it doesn't get any of the concessions that primary production gets. It will then have impacts on things like your land tax and your council rates, as well as any income tax. Now, this is the one I wanted that really did start causing some. You could end up having potentially your entire property ceasing to be primary production property and fully subject to land tax.
And council rates.
And council rates.
Production exemption.
You're no longer primary production. Revenue New South Wales has already published their view, where you have, for instance, a wind turbine on your property. The rent you might get from that turbine could be the largest single amount of income that you're getting from the property. That makes it non-primary production, and it's subject to land tax, just by having that wind turbine. And if you signed up that original option agreement on the terms that you were offered, I can bet you the rent you are going to receive will not reflect the increased land tax and the increased council rates.
But saying that, they are willing to negotiate if you add outgoings on
They're
top.
putting them in there now. They're putting in like covering increase.
Sorry?
They are at the beginning now.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
They'll cover the increase in land tax, and they'll cover the increase in insurance, and they'll cover the increase in rates.
Oh, that is good news, because the ones my guy was an early starter.
For neighbours as well.
You sign the option deed,
Yeah,
don't care about that.
No.
So the council rate, some of them increase from $3,000 to $65,000.
Yep.
Yeah.
So they're stopping that problem now. I know there's a few farms that got caught up early because they didn't have that in there, but it sounds like they're all coming through, playing the game now. But it is a trap for players that they aren't getting their lawyers to look at it, the accountants aren't aware of it. Because farmers are not used to paying land tax or council rates, so they don't come on their radar.
Yeah. So I'm glad that at least the ones around here are doing that. The client that I'm looking after, they certainly did not offer him.
I think unfortunately many players got negotiated into there before there was any sophistication in the market and anybody had any idea of some of these problems, and then really got contracts. Yeah.
Yeah, well, my guy had his rent doubled for the wind turbines that are going on to his property.
And keep in mind, the land tax and council rates is on a per lot basis. So you've got wind turbines across all lots that you're in trouble, but if you've got some lots that don't have any renewables, you might still get the exemption, the primary production exemption on that, so you pass all there and that's high.
one thing there is that your land tax is usually levied on the entire property. So you have to then lodge an objection to say, hey, you've got to separate the different titles to claim so that you can maintain your primary production status on the ones that don't have renewables on them. Because automatically they just lump them all together as a starting point. The greenies will always want to have a proper survey of the property to see what's there in the way of risks, because there's always going to be a biodiversity cost in their perception when you put a solar farm in, for example, because you're covering a very large area of the property. And in one of my cases, they found there was reports of having an endangered frog down in the creek. That was reported many years ago, but
They're still there.
they're obviously still there. So he had to protect that particular area. And the latest one is they said, oh, these are endangered tree species. For every tree you cut down to put that solar farm in, you've got to replant 3 new ones in a biodiversity offset arrangement. So it slows you down again. The biodiversity offsets have got some very strange tax consequences. Ordinarily, when you enter into any transaction that gives somebody a sort of an interest in your land, like a lease or a license or an easement, it's treated for tax as a brand new asset with no cost base, which is why you cop all the tax on any lump sums you receive for entering into a lease or entering into an option. The biodiversity offsets have got a very different system. They will allow you to treat it as if it is a part disposal of your property. And there's a formula for calculating the cost base of the bit that you are locking up in a biodiversity stewardship agreement. They say that you will say, what's the diminution in value caused by that? And that's the amount that you pick up, that fraction of your cost, to apply it against the capital, the proceeds you receive. And that will work out the cost of the land, you take a proportion, and so that's the bit that applies to the biodiversity offset. So you do get a cost base for that, for going into one of these biodiversity agreements. Now, these were not originally intended for solar farms and wind farms. They were designed basically as a green option. You could set aside part of your land and you would get tax concessions if you lock this land up for preservation of biological diversity. And you enter into it, it is a perpetual restriction on your title. These things are intended to last forever. In the context of ordinary farming operations, if you went into one of these things, there's a certain amount of money you have to chip in because they put in an amount of money into a government-controlled trust account to cover on future maintenance. In the area of solar farms, the power company will put that money up. But if you're doing it in your farm and you put that money up, it's instantly tax deductible. And that's your section, or subsection 31.5, subsection 5, gives us a specific deduction for what would ordinarily have been a capital outlay. But that doesn't apply for solar farms because it's not in connection with your farming business, it's to do with the solar farm. The CGT event D4 is, as it gives you a cost base, it also brings you within small business CGT concessions and your general CGT discounts. So if you've got it owned in names of individuals or in a trust, you'll get a general 50% discount for that for the capital gain that you get on from a biodiversity offset, and you can potentially get the small business CGT concessions. That's an additional 25% coming off as an active asset discount. You can get the retirement exemption, which is up to 500,000 lifetime limit per individual. If you're going to retire after this, well, you could even go for the 15-year exemption, and it's totally tax-free. In my case, the land is pre-CGT, so there is no CGT on the creation of the biodiversity offsets because he's got a disposal of pre-CGT land. But here's the sting in the tail. You're going to be selling those offsets to the power company. That's a separate capital gain. Normally that's not a problem because you're selling them for a lump sum, which is equal to the cost base that you had for those. The cost base is market value at the date you create them. They're disposed at that time for market value, no tax event. If you are farming and you hold on to them for a while and sell them, you'll get a capital gain that is subject to small business concessions, but you will not have that joy of the small business concessions if it's been used for a solar farm. The problem that we encountered was that the power company won't, as a first move, give you a lump sum payment for those credits. Their justification is to say, well, it's got to be maintained for the next 30 years for the lease and possibly for the 30 years after that under the option. We're not going to pay you all up front because you could break that covenant in that period and we lose all those offsets. So we will give you maybe 50% up front and we'll pay the rest over 20 years. Still looks good. In fact, my guy thought it was a really good deal until I said, well, look, that's not the way it's going to work for tax because you're getting paid a lump sum price paid in instalments. And the economic value is the discounted present value of all those payments. And that discounted present value is basically what your cost base is. But for capital gains tax, it's the gross amount. So all the money you're going to receive over 20 years is all added up together, and that's the disposal consideration day one when you sell your biodiversity credits. So that one is a real booby trap because you're going to basically get no, you could lose all that initial 50% in tax, or most of it, but it's a bit of a surprise because you don't really expect that the payments in the future are going to be taxed up front. I've probably covered most of that. Yeah, it's one of the big problems is obviously that it's everything you're getting is you're renting. You are renting. It's non-business renting of this land. It's not primary production income. Because what happens is that the power company has to provide that amount of credits to be allowed to do the development. So there's really nothing left to trade at that point in time because you've sold them, and they've been consumed as an offset against the biodiversity obligations of the power company putting in the solar farm. So ordinarily you could trade them, and that would, if you were just maintaining your primary production business, they would certainly then fall within the small business CGT concessions. You get your discounts, and yes, you could trade them. Now, one of the things that is there, and it's probably the plus, is that these biodiversity offset areas have to be maintained. There's money in the piggy bank because the initial contribution's gone into the government. Somebody has to get paid to do the weeding, the planting, the general maintenance, and that's usually the farm owner. So he's going to get a bit of money every year to do the weeding on. Not primary production business because it's not primary production, it's for it's maintenance of a non-productive area. So it's not primary production income, but it's income. And it maybe in bad years, a bit of a top-up income won't be a problem. Land tax, we touched on that. If the main source of income from the property is rent for the solar farm or for a wind turbine, and one wind turbine could be enough for some properties to tip them into non-prime producer status for land tax and for council rates. And so, thankfully, it sounds like they're now factoring that in from day one. We've only just got that across the line for our people. GST, you lose the primary producer concessions, and I'll just touch on another one, and that is the intergenerational transfer of farming land. You can't get the stamp duty concession because it's not for the non-primary production land. GST, well, you actually can still get an exemption from GST on a sale of property as a sale of a going concern, because commercial rental, which is what you've got with the lease, commercial rental is an enterprise for GST purposes, and so you can sell it as a going concern. That can be relevant because if you're selling land subject to GST, there's a 10% uplift in the price, which means there's an increase in the stamp duty payable by the purchaser. There's extra money has to be paid up front, albeit claimable back by the purchaser. If you're talking farming properties, that increase in stamp duty can be a significant factor. So you really would be normally looking at a GST concession if you to take that going concern concession. The bit that I haven't got worked out yet is when you've got the really big projects, and what I'm looking at is a 300 megawatt project. The deal that's been offered is that they're going to have 5% of the output provided to the community through a co-op or a company or a structure that hasn't been organised yet. If it was all done on your land, you might be given an opportunity to have a participation proportion of the project. What are the tax costs or tax implications of getting that? Now, somebody is going to, if it's put into this community structure, I can bet you that the landowners that have got the solar farm going on their property are the ones that are going to put their hand up for shares in that, and they're saying, well, we deserve that. If you're the sole owner of the property that the wind farm is going on to, you will get that offered to you. That's probably capital gains tax consideration for the lease as well. And so you could be taxed on the capitalised lump sum value of that right. And then you say, well, what do you do with that power? Because I've seen two different ways. One is they get a percentage of the proceeds of sale of the electricity, and the other is they just get 5% of the electricity. So that community organisation or that individual's got to then do a deal with the power grid people to be able to sell it or use it elsewhere. And I'm seeing people saying, well, oh, look, why don't we use it for green hydrogen? Green hydrogen is very inefficient at the moment as far as the use of electricity. It's about 5% efficient. And you think, well, hey, that's a bit less than useful. But big solar farms are regularly going to have excess capacity, excess production. At the moment, it's dumped. It just doesn't go anywhere. It just they just don't collect that. They don't use that electricity at all. It's gone. A 5% return is better than nothing. So if you're getting, for instance, that during those excess periods and you put it into green hydrogen, you're getting something that you wouldn't have got anything for if you just dumped the electricity. At the moment, there's not a huge market for hydrogen. That's a lot further down the path than electric vehicles and other electrification. There are discussions that maybe you can convert some of the heavy diesel machinery to run on hydrogen. I think that it would be more likely that they would run them on a product that you can produce from the hydrogen, and that's ammonia. Ammonia is actually an amazing fuel, and probably a bit, while it's pretty nasty and toxic, it's probably not as dangerous as hydrogen. The other thing is that if you're producing ammonia, you can produce fertiliser. At the moment, fertiliser is produced from hydrocarbons. So you can have green produced fertiliser. And that's certainly got a plus, and I think you might find that there'll be some incentive to go that way instead of having to use fertiliser produced from petroleum. So these are things that have got to be thought about if you're going to get a part of the production from it. Most of the really big projects these days are actually looking at having accompanying battery storage, but they still have excess production on hot sunny days.
So the community would be defined as the landholders and those that immediately affected?
Well, this is what's all grey at the moment with the project I'm looking at. It's purportedly to the general community, and I suspect that maybe the council will put their hand up and say, hey, maybe that should go to us.
Well, there's precedent here.
Yes, absolutely. And that's probably what the councils are going to point to and say, well, hey, this is where you'll benefit the whole community and not just a windfall for particular individual landowners. So that might be smoothing some of the bureaucratic hurdles. But if you've got a council that says, oh, we're going to get a nice little earner out of this, council's going to put less restrictions on the developments. So I suspect that might be where a lot of these concessions will end up. I'm seeing ones where the individuals are jockeying and the landowners themselves are saying, oh, how can we get our hands on it?
Yeah, what's in my head is that if it's a community investment, then how do you define the community? Is each individual, how do they determine, because it's taxable income?
That's exactly right. That's the problem. And the capital value when you're granted this right is a taxable receipt, because it's going to be if you get that benefit because you, as an incentive to enter into the lease to the power company, it's probably part of the sale price.
Yeah, well, it's we've got 3 farms. One's got 6 turbines, the other one's got 2 turbines, the other one's got 1. But we've got the communities, all the people around it, as defined. How do we divvy up who's going to get what income proportion? Because somebody's going to pay tax on it. And that's we're just talking about the community office.
Yep. Welcome to the fight.
Yeah.
Whether that's a co-op or whether it's a special
co-op.
purpose vehicle which then does community projects or...
This is where I think there will be negotiation on these new developments, is to say, well, who gets the concession, these incentives, and maybe it will be that say, well, look, it's got to be, for example, rebates to everyone around. That will soften the pain if you're a neighbour of it, but didn't actually get the solar farm.
Absolutely.
So
all the townspeople or whoever.
Yeah. So maybe that's where it'll probably end up. But at the moment, I'm seeing some pretty underhanded negotiating to try and pull in the benefit of this for individuals.